The autumn morning air carried a crisp chill as hundreds of tourists gathered along the iron gates of Buckingham Palace, their breath forming small clouds in the cool London atmosphere. Camera shutters clicked constantly as visitors from around the world captured memories of their royal experience. While street vendors sold miniature Union, Jack flags, and postcards featuring the iconic building, Guard Michael Stevens stood at his ceremonial post, his red tunic immaculate and his tall bearskin hat perfectly positioned despite the early hour. After 3 years of service with the Queen's Guard, he'd mastered the art of remaining motionless while maintaining complete awareness of his surroundings. His trained eyes continuously scanned the crowd for any signs of unusual activity or potential security concerns. The morning routine was familiar and comforting to Stevens. Tour buses arrived in steady streams, depositing excited visitors who marveled at the palace architecture and hoped to catch a glimpse of royal family members. Children pressed their faces against the gates, while parents explained the historical significance of the monarchy and the important role of the guards in protecting the royal residence. Among the crowd, elderly couple Margaret and Harold Thompson from Yorkshire had risen early to secure prime viewing positions for the changing of the guard ceremony. They had saved for 2 years to afford this London vacation, and seeing the palace guards in person represented the fulfillment of a lifelong dream for Margaret, who had been fascinated by royal traditions since childhood. Near the Victoria Memorial, a small golden retriever mix wandered aimlessly through the tourists, its coat dirty and matted from several days of living on the streets. The dog's name was Buster, though none of the passers-by knew this. He had been separated from his elderly owner 3 days earlier, during a medical emergency that had left him confused and alone in the unfamiliar city environment. Buster's owner, retired teacher Emma Watson, was currently lying unconscious in a London hospital after suffering a stroke while walking her beloved companion near Hyde Park. The confusion and trauma of watching paramedics take his human away had left Buster wandering the streets, searching desperately for the woman who had cared for him since he was a puppy. The dog's instincts had led him toward areas with heavy foot traffic, hoping somehow to locate Emma's familiar scent among the thousands of people moving through central London. His golden coat, once glossy and well-groomed, now showed signs of his desperate search, with burrs tangled in his fur, and mud coating his paws from sleeping in alleys and park corners. Stevens noticed the stray dog moving through the crowd, but initially assumed it belonged to one of the tourist families. However, as he observed more carefully, he could see that the animal appeared distressed and was clearly not under anyone's control. The dog's behavior suggested confusion and fear rather than the playful energy of a pet on a family outing. A group of American tourists attempted to approach Buster, thinking he was friendly and hoping to pet him. But the frightened animal backed away from their outstretched hands. His trust in strangers had been shaken by 3 days of survival on busy London streets, where well-meaning attempts to help had often resulted in him being chased or shouted at by people who considered him a nuisance. Margaret Thompson noticed the dog's obvious distress and pointed him out to her husband, expressing concern about an animal wandering alone in such a crowded and potentially dangerous area. Her own love for animals made her heart ache, seeing Buster's obvious confusion and fear as he searched for something or someone he couldn't find. The morning traffic around Buckingham Palace was reaching its peak volume as buses, taxis, and private vehicles navigated the busy streets surrounding the royal residence. The constant noise of engines, horns, and thousands of conversations created a cacophony that would be overwhelming even for humans, let alone a frightened dog already dealing with trauma and separation anxiety. Stevens watched with growing concern. As Buster moved closer to the busy road that separated the palace from the surrounding area, the dog's erratic behavior suggested he was becoming increasingly agitated, and his proximity to heavy traffic presented a serious safety hazard, not just for the animal, but potentially for drivers, who might swerve to avoid hitting him. Buster's golden coat caught the morning sunlight as he paused at the edge of the sidewalk, his nose lifting to test the air for any familiar scents that might lead him back to Emma. The overwhelming mixture of exhaust fumes, food vendors, and hundreds of different human scents made it impossible for him to detect anything that felt like home or safety. The crowd of tourists continued their sightseeing activities, most unaware of the small drama unfolding nearby. As a lost and frightened animal struggled to navigate an environment completely foreign to his usual quiet. Neighborhood walks with Emma. Camera flashes continued to pop as visitors documented their royal experience, creating brief moments of bright light that added to Buster's growing anxiety. Stevens felt the weight of his ceremonial responsibilities, competing with his natural compassion for animals in distress. His training required him to maintain his post and preserve the dignity of his uniform and position. But his personal values urged him to help a creature that was clearly in need of assistance and potentially heading toward serious danger. The morning sun climbed higher over London as the scene at Buckingham Palace balanced on the edge of potential tragedy. With hundreds of oblivious tourists, one concerned guard, and a desperately lost dog whose next decision could determine whether this beautiful autumn day would end in joy or sorrow. Buster's anxiety reached a critical point as a delivery truck backfired loudly while passing the palace gates, the sudden noise triggering his flight response after days of accumulated stress and fear. The frightened dog bolted directly toward the busy road, his only thought being to escape the overwhelming sensory assault of the crowded tourist area. Stevens watched in horror as the golden retriever mix darted between startled tourists, his path taking him directly into the flow of London traffic during one of the busiest periods of the morning. Double-decker buses, black cabs, and private vehicles moved at dangerous speeds. Their drivers focused on navigating the complex intersection rather than watching for unexpected obstacles. Margaret Thompson screamed and pointed as she saw Buster leap from the sidewalk into the street, her grandmother's instincts kicking in as she witnessed what appeared to be inevitable tragedy unfolding before her eyes. Harold grabbed his wife's arm to prevent her from impulsively trying to chase after the dog herself. The first vehicle to encounter Buster was a red London bus whose driver spotted the golden blur at the last possible moment, slamming on his brakes and causing the massive vehicle to skid sideways across the asphalt. Passengers inside were thrown from their seats as the bus driver fought to maintain control while avoiding the terrified animal. Behind the bus, taxi driver swerved violently to avoid the collision, his black cab jumping the curb and scattering a group of Japanese tourists who had been peacefully photographing the palace gates. The chain reaction of emergency maneuvers was creating chaos throughout the intersection as drivers tried to respond to the unexpected situation. Buster found himself trapped in the middle of the road, surrounded by honking vehicles and shouting drivers, his fear now so overwhelming that he simply cowered in place rather than continuing to run. The noise and confusion had paralyzed him completely, leaving him vulnerable to any vehicle whose driver might not see him in time. Stevens faced the most difficult decision of his military career as he watched the disaster unfolding just yards from his ceremonial post. His training and duty required him to maintain his position and preserve the dignity of the Queen's Guard. But his conscience demanded action to save an innocent creature's life. The crowd of tourists had gone from casual sightseeing to panicked observation as they realized they were witnessing a potential tragedy. Some visitors began recording the scene on their phones, while others covered their children's eyes or turned away entirely, unable to watch what they feared would be the dog's final moments. A white delivery van approached Buster's position at considerable speed, its driver distracted by his GPS navigation system and completely unaware of the small golden figure crouched in his path. The van's size and weight would make survival impossible if it struck the frightened animal, and its approach seemed unstoppable. Stevens made his choice in a split second that would define the rest of his life, abandoning his ceremonial post and sprinting toward the road with his distinctive red tunic flowing behind him like a cape. His years of military training gave him the speed and agility needed to navigate through the stopped traffic and startled pedestrians. The guard's sudden movement created gasps of amazement from the tourist crowd, many of whom had never seen a Queen's Guard break character or leave their post under any circumstances. His tall bearskin hat fell to the ground as he ran, but Stevens didn't pause to retrieve it. His entire focus concentrated on reaching Buster before the delivery van could claim its victim. Tourists began cheering and shouting encouragement as they realized what Stevens was attempting. Their cameras now capturing what appeared to be an unprecedented act of heroism by one of Britain's most recognizable symbols. The morning's peaceful sightseeing had transformed into something far more dramatic and emotionally charged. Stevens reached the edge of the traffic just as the delivery van bore down on Buster's position, driver finally spotting the commotion. But having insufficient time and distance to stop his vehicle safely, the guard's red tunic made him highly visible to all the drivers in the area, causing several to honk their horns in warning and confusion. The mathematical precision of the approaching disaster became clear to everyone watching as the livery van's speed and distance were calculated against Stevens' sprint and Buster's immobile position. Whether the guard could cover the remaining ground in time determine if this morning would end in triumph or tragedy for both man and animal. Margaret Thompson found herself praying aloud for the safety of both the brave guard and the terrified dog, her words mixing with similar pleas from other tourists who had become emotionally invested in the outcome of this spontaneous rescue attempt. The crowd's energy had shifted from casual observation to intense, emotional participation. Stevens could see Buster's frightened eyes as he closed the final distance between them, the dog's golden fur matted with fear and exhaustion from his days of wandering London streets. Time seemed to slow as the guard prepared to risk everything to save a creature he had never met, whose story he didn't know, but whose life had suddenly become the most important thing in his world. Stevens dove forward with athletic precision, his red tunic billowing as he scooped Buster into his arms. Just as the delivery van roared past the spot where the dog had been cowering, the van's side mirror brushed against Stevens' shoulder, close, enough that he could feel the wind from its passage. But both guard and dog were safely clear of the vehicle's deadly path. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause and cheers as Stevens rolled to safety on the far side of the street, clutching the trembling golden retriever against his chest. Tourists from dozens of countries joined in celebration of what they had just witnessed, their cameras capturing the moment when duty gave way to compassion in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Buster's entire body shook with fear and exhaustion, but he instinctively pressed closer to Stevens as he recognized the safety and protection offered by human contact. After 3 terrifying days alone on London streets, the dog's golden fur was matted and dirty, but his intelligent eyes showed gratitude even through his trauma and confusion. Margaret Thompson wiped tears from her eyes as she watched Stevens gently cradle the rescued dog, her heart overflowing with admiration for the guard's selfless actions. "Harold," she whispered to her husband, "in 60 years of marriage, I've never seen anything so brave and beautiful as what that young man just did." The delivery van driver, finally aware of what had nearly occurred, pulled over and rushed back to check on both the guard and the dog he had almost struck. His face was pale with shock as he realized how close he had come to being responsible for a tragedy that would have haunted him for the rest of his life. Stevens sat on the sidewalk with Buster still in his arms, both of them breathing heavily. From the adrenaline and exertion of their near-death experience, the guard's pristine uniform was now dirty and torn, his bearskin hat lying forgotten in the street. But his smile showed pure joy at having succeeded in his impulsive rescue mission. Other members of the Queen's Guard had witnessed the entire sequence of events from their posts, and while protocol demanded they maintain their positions, their expressions showed obvious pride in their colleagues' heroic actions. The Brotherhood of the Guards had always valued courage and sacrifice, and Stevens had just demonstrated both qualities in the most public way possible. A police constable arrived at the scene to assess the situation and ensure traffic could resume safely, but his official demeanor quickly gave way to amazement as tourists excitedly recounted the rescue they had just witnessed. The officer had never encountered a situation where a ceremonial guard had abandoned his post to save an animal's life. Stevens examined Buster carefully, checking for injuries from the dog's days on the street or from their dramatic rescue. Apart from matted fur, dirty paws, and obvious exhaustion, the golden retriever appeared physically unharmed, though his emotional trauma was evident in his continued trembling and the way he pressed against his rescuer for comfort. The crowd of tourists had grown substantially as word of the rescue spread through social media and messaging apps, the people abandoning their planned sightseeing activities to witness the aftermath of Stephen's heroic actions. Many visitors expressed amazement that they had chosen this particular morning to visit Buckingham Palace. Harold Thompson approached Stevens with a bottle of water from his backpack, offering it for both the guard and the dog while expressing his admiration for the rescue. "Son," he said with emotion thick in his Yorkshire accent, "you've restored our faith in human decency with what you've done here today." Stevens accepted the water gratefully, using some to clean Buster's dirty face and paws while allowing the dog to drink from his cupped hands. The simple act of caring for the animal's immediate needs helped calm both of them after the intensity of their shared experience in the traffic. Buster's response to Stephen's gentle care was immediate and touching, as the frightened animal seemed to recognize that he had finally found someone who would protect and help him. The dog's tail began wagging weakly, the first sign of hope he had shown since being separated from his beloved owner, Emma. News crews were already being dispatched to the palace as social media posts about the rescue began going viral around the world, with footage captured by tourist phones showing Stephen's dramatic sprint into traffic and successful rescue of the endangered dog. The story was spreading faster than anyone could have anticipated. Stevens realized that his spontaneous decision to help Buster would likely result in disciplinary action from his superiors, as abandoning a ceremonial post was a serious breach of protocol, regardless of the circumstances. However, looking into the grateful eyes of the dog he had saved, he felt no regret about his choice to prioritize compassion over regulations. A veterinarian who had been visiting the palace as a tourist offered to examine Buster on the spot, her professional expertise providing reassurance that the dog's physical condition, while requiring attention, was not life-threatening. Her evaluation helped ease concerns about whether Buster needed immediate emergency medical care. The gathering crowd included people from every continent, their diverse languages united in expressions of admiration for what they had witnessed. Children pointed excitedly at Stevens and Buster, while adults wiped away tears and applauded spontaneously, as the magnitude of the guard's selfless actions continued to resonate with everyone present. Within hours of the rescue, Stevens found himself in the unusual position of being summoned to meet with senior palace officials while still in his torn and dirty uniform.
Ow.
With Buster refusing to leave his side despite gentle attempts to separate them, the dog had bonded so completely with his rescuer that he whimpered whenever Stevens moved more than a few feet away. Colonel James Whitfield, commanding officer of the Queen's Guard, arrived at the scene with a mixture of concern about protocol violations and obvious admiration for Stevens' courage. The colonel had served in combat zones where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, and he recognized genuine heroism when he saw it. Television. News crews from major international networks had set up equipment around Buckingham Palace as the story of the guard's rescue spread across global media platforms. The footage captured by tourist phones was being broadcast on networks from CNN to the BBC, making Stevens and Buster instant celebrities around the world. Margaret and Harold Thompson had remained at the scene, unwilling to leave until they knew the outcome for both the brave guard and the dog he had saved. Other tourists had formed an impromptu support group, sharing contact information and promising to follow up on the story. No matter where their travels took them next, animal control officers arrived to take custody of Buster. But the dog's distressed reaction to potential separation from Stevens created an immediate dilemma. Buster had clearly formed an intense attachment to his rescuer, and forcing them apart seemed cruel after everything they had shared together during the dramatic rescue. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the veterinarian who had examined Buster earlier, offered to provide temporary care for the dog while authorities worked to locate his owner or find appropriate placement. Her professional expertise and obvious compassion made her an ideal candidate to help Buster transition from his traumatic street experience. Stevens learned that his actions, while heroic, had indeed violated strict protocols governing the conduct of ceremonial guards, and he would face a formal disciplinary hearing within the week. However, the overwhelming public support for his rescue mission was creating political pressure to handle the situation with sensitivity and wisdom. The palace social media accounts were being flooded with messages from people around the world, praising Stevens' actions and demanding that he be honored rather than punished for his compassion and bravery. The hashtag Guard Hero was trending globally as people shared the rescue footage and their own reactions to witnessing such selfless heroism. Buster's story took an unexpected turn when Dr. Mitchell discovered a microchip during her examination, providing identification information that could potentially reunite the dog with his owner. The chip registration led to Emma Watson, who was listed as Buster's guardian, though her current condition and location remained unknown. Hospital records revealed that Emma had been admitted 3 days earlier following a stroke, which explained Buster's separation from his owner and his desperate wandering through London streets. The timing aligned perfectly with when the dog had first been spotted in the palace area, suggesting he had been searching for his beloved human. Stevens volunteered to accompany Dr. Mitchell to the hospital where Emma was recovering, hoping that seeing Buster might provide emotional support that could aid in her rehabilitation. The guard's personal investment in the dog's welfare had grown stronger with each hour they spent together. Emma Watson's condition had stabilized, and she was conscious but weak when Stevens and Dr. Mitchell arrived with Buster at the hospital. The reunion between the elderly woman and her beloved companion was so emotional that hardened medical staff found themselves wiping away tears as they witnessed the joy on both faces. Buster, Emma whispered as her dog gently placed his head on her hospital bed, his tail wagging with pure happiness at finding his human safe and alive. "I've been so worried about you, my dear boy. I didn't know what happened to you when I got sick." Stevens stood quietly in the corner of the hospital room, watching the reunion and feeling a deep satisfaction that his impulsive rescue had led to this moment of healing and joy. The risk to his career suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the happiness he had helped restore to both Emma and Buster. The hospital staff allowed Buster to remain with Emma despite usual pet restrictions, recognizing that the emotional benefits of their reunion could contribute significantly to her recovery process. The dog seemed to understand his owner's fragile condition, remaining calm and gentle as he stayed close to her bedside. Media representatives had followed Stevens to the hospital, hoping to capture the next chapter of the story that had captivated audiences worldwide. However, respect for patient privacy required them to remain in the lobby while the private reunion took place upstairs in Emma's room. Emma expressed profound gratitude to Stevens for saving Buster's life, explaining that the dog had been her constant companion since her husband's death 5 years earlier. "He's all I have left," she told the guard. "He gave him back to me when I thought I had lost everything that mattered." The emotional weight of Emma's words affected Stevens deeply as he realized that his split-second decision to abandon protocol had preserved not just a dog's life, but a crucial relationship that gave meaning and purpose to an elderly woman's existence. The rescue had implications far beyond what he had initially understood. The disciplinary hearing for Stevens took place in a formal military setting, but the atmosphere was unlike any court-martial in the history of the Queen's Guard. The room was packed with supporters, including Margaret and Harold Thompson, who had traveled from Yorkshire specifically to testify on behalf of the Guard who had shown such remarkable courage and compassion. Colonel Whitfield presented the case with obvious reluctance, acknowledging that while Stevens had technically violated protocol by abandoning his ceremonial post, the circumstances were extraordinary and the outcome had brought honor to the entire regiment. The colonel's military bearing could not completely hide his personal admiration for his subordinate's actions. Emma Watson had been released from the hospital and attended the hearing with Buster at her side, both of them serving as living testimony to the positive outcome of Stevens' decision. Her statement to the hearing panel was delivered with quiet dignity and profound gratitude that moved even the most senior officials present. "This young man didn't just save my dog's life," Emma testified, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "He saved my reason for living. Buster is my family, my companion, my purpose each day. Without him, I would have had nothing left to recover for after my stroke." The panel of senior officers faced an unprecedented situation, as military regulations clearly prohibited abandoning assigned posts, regardless of circumstances. Yet the global attention and overwhelming public support made harsh punishment politically and morally complicated. The case had evolved far beyond simple military discipline. International media coverage had transformed Stevens into a symbol of compassion, triumphing over rigid bureaucracy, with editorial writers and social commentators praising his actions as representing the best qualities of both military service and human decency. The story had resonated with people worldwide who saw it as proof that individual conscience could still matter in institutional settings. Dr. Mitchell provided expert testimony about Buster's condition when she first examined him, describing signs of severe stress, dehydration, and exhaustion that indicated the dog would not have survived much longer on London streets. Her professional assessment added medical weight to arguments that Stevens' actions had been genuinely life-saving. The hearing panel also received testimony from the delivery van driver whose vehicle had nearly struck Buster, with the man's emotional account of how close he had come to causing a tragedy that would have haunted him forever. His gratitude to Stevens for preventing that outcome added another dimension to the case. Tourist witnesses from multiple countries had provided written statements describing their observations of the rescue, with many noting that Stevens' actions had restored their faith in human kindness and had made their London visit unforgettable for the most positive reasons imaginable. Their perspectives showed the international impact of the incident. Stevens himself testified with quiet dignity about his decision-making process, explaining that military training had taught him to assess threats and take immediate action to protect those who could not protect themselves. He accepted full responsibility for protocol violations, while maintaining that he would make the same choice again under similar circumstances. The panel deliberated for 3 hours, while supporters gathered outside the hearing room, with social media campaigns intensifying around the world as people waited to learn Stevens' fate. The hashtag #SaveGuardStevens joined #GuardHero. In trending globally as public pressure mounted for a merciful outcome, Colonel Whitfield emerged from deliberations to announce the panel's decision, his expression carefully neutral as he faced in the packed room of supporters, media representatives, and fellow guards who had come to show solidarity with their colleague. The tension in the room was almost unbearable as everyone waited for the verdict. "Guard Stevens," the colonel began. "Formally, your actions on the morning in question constituted a clear violation of standing orders and ceremonial protocol. However, this panel recognizes that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional responses, and that the core values of military service include protecting those who cannot protect themselves." The announcement of Stevens' punishment surprised everyone present, as the panel had decided to issue a formal reprimand for protocol violation while simultaneously recommending him for a commendation for bravery and compassion. The dual nature of the decision reflected the complexity of balancing military discipline with recognition of heroic actions. Emma Watson broke into tears of relief and joy as the decision was announced, while Buster seemed to sense the positive energy in the room and began wagging his tail enthusiastically. Margaret and Harold Thompson embraced each other with satisfaction that justice had prevailed for the young man, whose bravery had inspired them so deeply. Stevens accepted the panel's decision with characteristic dignity, expressing gratitude that he would be allowed to continue serving with the Queen's Guard while acknowledging the importance of military discipline and protocol. His response showed the maturity and professionalism that had made his heroic actions even more remarkable. The media response to the hearing outcome was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators praising the military leadership's wisdom in finding a solution that upheld both discipline and compassion. The case was being hailed as an example of how institutions could adapt to recognize the human element within rigid systems. Plans were already underway for Stevens to receive additional honors from civilian organizations and animal welfare groups, recognizing his actions as representing the best of British values and military tradition. The story had evolved from a simple rescue into a celebration of courage, compassion, and the bonds between humans and animals. 1 year after the rescue, Stevens stood at his familiar post at Buckingham Palace, his red tunic impeccable and his bearing proud as tourists gathered for another morning ceremony. However, this anniversary morning was different from all the others, as special guests had been invited to witness a unique addition to the traditional changing of the guard routine. Emma Watson sat in a place of honor near the palace gates, her health fully restored and her spirits lifted by the year of friendship that had developed with Stevens and the ongoing celebrity status that Buster had achieved. The elderly woman had become something of a local celebrity herself, frequently invited to speak about the importance of human-animal bonds and the kindness of strangers. Buster wore a specially designed ceremonial collar for the anniversary celebration, his golden fur now glossy and healthy after months of excellent care from Emma and regular veterinary attention from Dr. Mitchell, who had become a close family friend. The dog's transformation from frightened stray to beloved companion was complete and remarkable. Margaret and Harold Thompson had returned to London for the anniversary, bringing their entire extended family to witness the celebration of the rescue that had touched their hearts so deeply. Their grandchildren listened with wide eyes as they recounted the story of the brave guard and the dog he had saved from certain death in traffic. The ceremony began with traditional military precision, but at a designated moment, Stevens was allowed to step forward and be officially recognized for his act of heroism. Colonel Whitfield presented him with a special commendation that had been approved by the highest levels of military command, acknowledging his courage and compassion. Dr. Mitchell had established a foundation for animal rescue in honor of the anniversary, with Stevens serving as honorary chairman and Buster as the official mascot. The organization had already helped dozens of lost and abandoned animals find loving homes, turning the inspiration of one rescue into an ongoing mission of compassion. The international media attention had never completely faded, with documentary crews from multiple countries producing films about the rescue and its aftermath. The story had been translated into dozens of languages and had become a popular subject for children's books that taught lessons about kindness, bravery, and caring for animals. Stevens had been promoted to corporal following his exemplary service. Record and the positive attention his actions had brought to the Queen's Guard. His superiors recognized that his split-second decision had enhanced rather than diminished the reputation of the military organization he represented. Tourism at Buckingham Palace had increased significantly in the months following the rescue, with many visitors specifically hoping to see Stevens at his post or to hear first-hand accounts of the dramatic events. Tour guides had incorporated the story into their regular presentations, using it to illustrate the human side of the ceremonial guards. Emma had written a book about her experience, titled Buster's Guardian Angel, with proceeds donated to animal welfare charities and veteran support organizations. The book had become a bestseller in multiple countries, touching readers with its message about the unexpected connections that can form between strangers during moments of crisis. The delivery van driver who had nearly struck Buster had become a vocal advocate for traffic safety and animal welfare, using his own experience to educate other drivers about the importance of remaining alert for unexpected situations. His transformation from potential tragedy to positive activism had become another inspiring element of the story. Buster's daily walks with Emma had become local attractions in their neighborhood, with residents and visitors often stopping to meet the famous dog and hear about his rescue adventure. The golden retriever seemed to enjoy his celebrity status, wagging his tail enthusiastically for every admirer and photo opportunity. The anniversary ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for all the animals who had not been as fortunate as Buster, followed by thunderous applause as Stevens returned to his post with renewed pride in his service. The crowd dispersed slowly, many visitors reluctant to leave the site of such a meaningful celebration. Stevens often reflected on how a single moment of choosing compassion over protocol had changed his life so dramatically, bringing him friendships, recognition, and a sense of purpose that went far beyond his military duties. He had learned that sometimes the most important decisions were made, not with careful planning, but with instinctive kindness. Emma and Buster continued their regular visits to the palace, with the dog always showing special excitement when he saw Stevens at his post. Their friendship had become a symbol of how crisis could create lasting bonds between people who might never have otherwise met, proving that heroism often led to relationships more valuable than medals or recognition. As the morning sun climbed higher over London, Stevens maintained his ceremonial vigil with the knowledge that his actions had created ripples of positive change that continued spreading around the world. The rescue of one frightened dog had become a reminder that individual acts of courage and compassion could inspire countless others to choose kindness over indifference. The story of Guard Stevens and Buster had become part of Buckingham Palace history, joining the countless tales of duty, service, and sacrifice that defined the tradition of the Queen's Guard. Future generations would learn about this incident as proof that true heroism often required breaking rules to uphold higher values, and that the greatest victories were sometimes measured not in military terms, but in lives saved and hearts touched.